The monsters, we called, the first law of galactic warfare had stood for 10,000 years. Preserve what you can, for today's enemy might be tomorrow's ally. It was a civilized approach to conflict, born from species that had evolved beyond their primitive roots. The humans apparently had never received that memo. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the inevitable, watching the tactical display with the detached interest of a chess player contemplating their next move. The Devourer swarm was 12 light minutes away, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror that had consumed 17 star systems. The Galactic Council's observers, maintaining what they thought was a safe distance, were about to receive an education in human warfare. "Admiral," Commander Torres reported, his augmented eyes glowing with data feeds, "the Devourers are responding to our approach. They're confused, sir. Our energy signatures don't match anything in their consumption protocols." Chen nodded. That had been deliberate. Every human ship was running what they called Discord protocols, rapidly shifting energy frequencies that made them appear as quantum static to most sensors. To the Devourers, who hunted by identifying consistent energy patterns, the human fleet must have seemed like space-time having a seizure. "Launch the seedlings," Chen ordered. From the carrier vessels, thousands of tiny pods ejected into space. Each one was no larger than a human fist, coated in radar-absorbing materials and powered by miniature fusion cores. The Galactic Council's observers initially dismissed them as debris or chaff. They were wrong. The seedlings accelerated not toward the Devourers but around them. They took positions at Lagrange points in the shadows of asteroids, behind the gravitational lensing of distant stars, and then they began to sing. It wasn't music, not really. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of electromagnetic radiation, gravitational pulses, and quantum fluctuations. To the Devourers, who communicated through a hive mind spanning subspace frequencies, it was the equivalent of someone screaming directly into their collective consciousness. The swarm convulsed. For the first time in their recorded history, the Devourers stopped advancing. "They're trying to adapt," Lieutenant Commander Yoshi reported from the science station. "Their hive mind is attempting to filter out the interference." "Let them try," Chen replied. Begin Phase 2. The human destroyers, sleek vessels built for speed and violence, suddenly accelerated to percentages of light speed that should have been impossible for ships of their mass. They didn't engage the Devourers directly. Instead, they performed what looked like an insane dance around the swarm's edges, launching specialized munitions that the Council's observers couldn't identify. It wasn't until the munitions detonated that the strategy became clear. They weren't explosives. They were terraforming bombs, devices humanity had originally developed to create atmosphere on dead worlds. But these had been modified. Instead of creating breathable air, they released clouds of engineered bacteria. Council Prime Zix Theta, watching from the safety of Nexus Station, flashed patterns of horror. "Biological warfare is forbidden by 17 treaties. Treaties we never signed." Admiral Chen's voice came through the comm. "And these aren't weapons. They're antibodies." The bacteria couldn't harm the Devourers directly. The creatures were too alien, their biology too different. But that wasn't the goal. The bacteria began consuming something far more precious, the quantum foam itself. They were eating the underlying structure of spacetime that the Devourers used to maintain their hive-mind connection. Individual Devourer units began to drift away from the swarm, their link to the collective severed. And that's when the humans revealed why they'd really come in person instead of sending drones. "All hunting parties, you are cleared to engage. Happy hunting." From the human ships launched smaller craft, not fighters in the traditional sense, but something far more terrifying. Single-pilot vessels, each one customized by its operator, armed with weapons that violated the spirit, if not the letter, of every civilized warfare convention. The pilots themselves were the elite of humanity's military, volunteers who had undergone genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, and psychological conditioning that would have been considered torture by any civilized standard. They called themselves Reapers, and they had been created for exactly this moment. They didn't fight the Devourers so much as they hunted them. Each isolated unit was tracked, pursued, and eliminated with a methodical precision that made the Council's observers sick. The Reapers used weapons that turned the Devourers' own biology against them. Viruses that rewrote their genetic code, nanobots that converted their biomass into fuel, sonic weapons that shattered their crystalline cores. But it was what happened next that truly demonstrated why humanity had been quarantined. "Admiral," one of the Council observers transmitted, "the isolated Devourer units are trying to surrender. They're broadcasting distress signals." Chen's expression didn't change. "The Devourers consumed 3 billion Vorthons. They don't get mercy. They get justice." The hunting continued for 7 hours. Not a single isolated Devourer unit survived. Meanwhile, the main swarm was struggling with a new problem. The human capital ships had begun what they called hammer and anvil tactics. Using their modified FTL drives, they were performing micro-jumps, appearing inside the swarm, firing devastating broadsides, then jumping away before the Devourers could respond. But the real genius of the human strategy was revealed when Elder Yan performed a deep psychic scan. By the void, Yan's psychic emanation was one of terrified awe. The humans, they're not trying to destroy the hive mind. They're teaching it fear. Every attack, every strategy, every weapon was designed not just to kill but to traumatize. The seedlings screaming, the severing of individual units, the relentless hunting. It was psychological warfare on a scale the galaxy had never seen. And it was working. The Devourers, a species that had never known predation, were learning what it meant to be prey. "Sir," Commander Torres reported, "we're detecting massive fluctuations in the swarm's cohesion. They're trying to retreat." For 10,000 years, the Devourers had been an unstoppable force, consuming everything in their path. No one had ever seen them retreat. "Don't let them," Chen ordered. "Deploy the cage." From the largest human vessel, a ship simply designated as Arsenal launched a spread of specialized torpedoes. They detonated in a perfect sphere around the Devourer swarm, but instead of explosions, they created something else: artificial singularities. Tiny black holes that bent space-time into a prison. The Devourers couldn't jump to FTL. They couldn't retreat. They could only face what came next. "This is genocide," Ambassador Kretok transmitted from the observation fleet. "This is why we quarantined you." Admiral Chen finally turned to address the Council directly. "No, Ambassador. Genocide is what they did to the Vorthons, to the 17 systems they consumed, to the countless species they erased from existence." Her eyes were cold, harder than the metal of her ship. "This is pest control." The final phase of the human assault was almost anticlimactic. Weapons that had been charging since the fleet's arrival finally fired. Not energy beams or projectiles, but something far more insidious. Directed entropy fields that aged the Devourers 10 million years in seconds. Their biomechanical bodies crumbled to dust, their organic components decayed to base molecules, their very existence erased from the universe. In less than a day, humanity had accomplished what the combined might of the Galactic Council couldn't do in cycles. The Devourer threat was over. As the human fleet regrouped, Admiral Chen opened a channel to the Council. "The immediate threat has been neutralized. We've analyzed the Devourer remains and are transmitting countermeasures to prevent any resurgence. Consider this our gift to the galaxy. Zix Theta's light patterns were uncertain. What do you want in return?" Chen smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Nothing. We've been alone for 300 years, watching you all through our little spy probes. We've seen your peace, your prosperity, your civilization. It's beautiful. Foreign to us, but beautiful." She paused, looking at something off-screen. When she turned back, her expression was thoughtful. "We know what we are. We're the monsters in your children's stories. The things that go bump in the cosmic night. We're what evolution creates when it's trying to build the perfect survivor. We're not asking to join your civilization. We'd destroy it just by existing within it." "Then what?" Elder Yan asked. "We'll go back to our quarantine. Back to our death world and our violent little corner of space. But now you know we're watching. And if something like the Devourers ever threatens you again, you know what to do." Chen's smile returned, sharp and dangerous. "Send a message. Say the monsters' names, and we'll come." She paused one final time. "But remember this lesson. We came because you asked. We helped because, in our own twisted way, we care about life in this galaxy, even if we can never truly be part of it. We're humanity. We're contradiction incarnate. We're capable of beauty and horror in equal measure. Today you needed our horror. Pray you never need it again." The last transmission. The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 17 standard cycles when it finally reached the Galactic Council's emergency chambers on Nexus Station. By then, 3 billion Vorthons were already dead. Council Prime Zixa Theta's crystalline form flickered with distress patterns as she processed the transmission. Her species, the Luminari, communicated through light frequencies, and right now her body was broadcasting pure terror to everyone in the chamber. The message from Vorthon space was simple, desperate, and final. They're eating our worlds. Nothing stops them. Please, anyone, help us. The holographic display at the chamber's center showed the advancing front of the Devourers. Where vibrant star systems once thrived, only darkness remained. Not the darkness of empty space, but something worse. A writhing, consuming void that grew larger with each passing hour. The Devourers didn't just destroy civilizations. They consumed everything: matter, energy, even the quantum foundations of space itself. Ambassador Kree-Tak, of the Thendari Federation, stood on his 4 legs, his chitinous armor rattling with agitation.
15 fleet groups we've sent, 15.
The combined might of 7 species, and they didn't even slow them down. His compound eyes reflected the tactical display showing the remains of those fleets. Or rather, the absence of remains. There was nothing left to mark where thousands of ships and millions of brave souls had made their last stand. The chamber fell into a silence so profound that even the station's life support systems seemed to hold their breath. Every species present, from the methane-breathing selfie to the silicon-based quartzoids, understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't just another border dispute or resource conflict. This was extinction approaching on a galactic scale. Elder Yan of the Celestial Collective finally broke the silence. Their psychic emanations carried the weight of terrible knowledge. There is another option. The words hung in the air like a toxin. Every being present knew what Yan meant, and the mere suggestion sent ripples of fear through the assembly. No. The response came from a dozen voices simultaneously. We swore never to break the quarantine. Zixa Theta's light pattern shifted to deep ultraviolet, the color of grave consideration. Tell me, fellow counselors, what is worse, to unleash the Deathworlders or to watch the galaxy die? The term Deathworlders hadn't been spoken in these chambers for 300 standard years. It referred to the species from the 3rd planet orbiting Sol, a yellow dwarf star in what should have been an unremarkable system. Earth, they called their world, though every other civilized species knew it by its proper designation. Death World Prime. You weren't there, whispered Ambassador Helix of the Andromedans, their gaseous form condensing with remembered fear. You didn't see what they did during the Proxima incident. They didn't just defeat the Rakari slavers, they hunted them. Across 12 systems, they turned predation into an art form, and when they were done, Helix's form shuddered. They sent the survivors back as a message. The Rakari never raided again. They never even left their home system again. Kree-Tak's antennae twitched. They evolved on a world that tries to kill them daily. Storms that can rip cities apart. Predators that hunt in packs. Diseases that mutate faster than medicine can cure. Gravity so intense it would crush half the species here. They didn't just survive that hell, they thrived in it. They conquered it, and then they looked to the stars and asked, what's next? But Zixa Theta had already made her decision. The weight of 3 billion dead Vorthons, with billions more to follow, made the choice inevitable. Project the casualty estimates if we do nothing. The hologram shifted, showing the Devourer's projected path. Within 40 cycles, they would reach the core worlds. Within 100, half the galaxy would be consumed. Within 200, there would be nothing left but the Devourers and empty space. We quarantined them because we feared them, Zixa Theta said, her light patterns resolute. But perhaps what we need now is something to be feared, something that makes even nightmares wake in terror. Send the message to Earth. The Council voted. It wasn't unanimous, nothing involving humans ever was, but it passed. The quantum transmitters aligned, piercing through the quarantine field that had isolated Sol system for centuries. The message was simple. The galaxy calls for aid. We face extinction. Despite our past, will you help? They expected days, perhaps weeks, for a response. Earth had been isolated after all. They would need time to consider, to debate, to prepare. The response came in 17 seconds. We're already on our way. The council chamber erupted in confusion. Already on their way? How was that possible? The quarantine had been absolute. No signals in or out. No ships could pass the barrier. How could they? Elder Yan's psychic presence suddenly spiked with alarm. The quarantine field? Scan it immediately. The results were impossible. The quarantine field was intact, functioning perfectly, but scattered throughout its quantum matrix were human signatures. Microscopic probes, so small they existed on the edge of detectability, had been threaded through the barrier's fabric like needles through cloth. The humans hadn't broken the quarantine. They'd simply found a way to watch through it. They've been monitoring us, Kretok said, his voice a mixture of outrage and admiration. This entire time they've been watching, listening, learning. Before anyone could respond, proximity alarms screamed through the station. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace, not the smooth, elegant transitions the galaxy was accustomed to, but violent tears in space-time that sent ripples through the fabric of reality itself. The human fleet had arrived. The first thing the sensors detected was metal. So much metal. Where the Galactic Council's ships were works of art. Crystalline lattices, bioorganic curves, energy matrices given form. The human vessels were brutal in their simplicity. Angular, aggressive, built not to be beautiful, but to kill. The flagship was a monster of gray metal and violence, 2 kilometers of armor and weapons that looked like it had been forged in the heart of a dying star. Its name was etched in multiple languages across its hull, including Standard Galactic, UESS Inevitable. More ships followed, dozens, hundreds, each one unique. As if humans couldn't even agree on a single design philosophy for war. Some were sleek predators built for speed. Others were floating fortresses, bristling with weapons the Council's scientists couldn't even identify. And among them, most terrifying of all were the carrier ships, vast hives that spawned smaller craft like insects from a disturbed nest. The human fleet commander appeared on the main display. Admiral Sarah Chen was small by human standards, but her eyes held something that made even Elder Yan's psychic presence recoil. It wasn't cruelty or bloodlust. It was worse. It was calculation. The look of a species that had turned survival into a science and warfare into an art. Galactic Council, she said, her voice carrying across the void. You asked for help. We've come to deliver it. But understand this, you didn't call for heroes. You called for monsters. And monsters we shall be. She paused, studying the sensor data of the Devourer advancement. Where others had shown fear or concern, Admiral Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. We've been preparing for this. Every war we've fought, every enemy we've faced was just practice. We've studied your failures. We know why you lost. She leaned forward. You tried to fight them like civilized beings. That was your first mistake. Zix Theta found her voice. Admiral Chen, we're grateful for your assistance, but perhaps we should coordinate. No. The word was flat, final. You called us because everything else failed. So now you'll stand back and watch how a species from a death world handles an existential threat. You wanted monsters to fight monsters. Well, Chen's smile widened, showing teeth that evolution had kept sharp despite millennia of civilization. Here we are. The human fleet began to move not in the coordinated ballet the galaxy's navies preferred, but in something that looked almost chaotic, until the Council's tactical computers analyzed it. Then the pattern became clear. It wasn't chaos, it was controlled violence, a strategy built on unpredictability and overwhelming force. As the human fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives, heading directly for the Devourer swarm, Ambassador Kretok voiced what everyone was thinking. What have we done? Zixatheta's light patterns dimmed to almost nothing. We've awakened something that should have been left sleeping. And now we can only hope that when the Devourers are gone, the humans will remember we called them as friends, not as prey. The human fleet began to power up their FTL drives, preparing to return to their quarantine. But before they left, they deployed one final set of beacons around the battlefield. The Council's observers would later discover these were memorial markers, each one broadcasting the names of every Vorthan who had died, every ship that had been lost, every world that had been consumed. Even monsters, it seemed, could mourn. As the last human ship disappeared into hyperspace, leaving only the memorial beacons and the cosmic dust that had once been the Devourers, Ambassador Kretok voiced the question that would haunt the Galactic Council for generations. They defeated the Devourers in less than a day. They've been watching us for centuries despite our quarantine. They have weapons we can't even comprehend. If they ever decided we were a threat. Zix Theta's response was barely visible, her light patterns dim with terrible understanding. Then we would learn why their world is called Earth, because that's all that would be left of us. Dust and Earth. The galaxy was safe. The Devourers were gone. But in their place was a new understanding, a new fear, and perhaps a new respect. Humanity had answered the call. The monsters had saved them all. And now the monsters were going home, leaving the galaxy to wonder if they'd saved it, or simply marked it as territory to be protected. The memorial beacons continued their eternal broadcast, a reminder of the day the galaxy called for help, and death itself answered.